I'm Robert Swan. What you are about to witness is a compilation of the events, investigations, discovery, and exposure of the use of embedded imagery in religious art and its subsequent effects. This is the true story of the scandals uncovered by Silver Sword International producer and artist Michael A. Kalache during his journey to merge media with morality, beginning with the production arrangements of the family-oriented feature film, Intimate Fear. The history of religious art, along with their embedded images, are isolated and detailed with analysis and the information, as well as techniques on how to locate such imagery in art, will improve viewer recognition. The original artwork, by the design of their creators and promoters, is an attempt to program the viewer without their conscious knowledge. However, the many images shown throughout the film will be identified and extracted in order to be viewed consciously. Rape of the Soul was filmed to heal the many that have suffered from such uninvited violation, as well as a form of education during the spiritual battle of good versus evil. Michael A. Kalache, originally from New York City, comes from a long family lineage of Italian artists, performers, composers, and inventors. He began showing his inherent artistic skills, especially in visual and performing arts. After an extensive Catholic education, he became married in 1989, producing 4 children. Pope John Paul II wrote a letter to artists in 1999 asking that creators of the arts respect Christ in their works. Kalache took this letter to heart and created a campaign to merge media with morality, eventually making it the mission of independent film studio Silver Sword International, while continuing to hone his skills as a director, actor, and writer. While in Montreal in the summer of 2002, Kalache wrote the screenplay Intimate Fear, a family-oriented film focusing on the struggles of dysfunctional family relationships. He decided that Toronto, Ontario would fill the location needs for the feature film. Before heading there, he contacted the Knights of Columbus, or KFC, the largest Catholic men's fraternal organization in the world. Although Kalache is not a knight, his own father, a former World War II combat veteran in Europe, became a third-degree knight in 1953, and shortly before his death, he asked Michael to remember the KFC. In August of 2002, Kalache offered Supreme Knight Carl Anderson to read the script under strict non-disclosure, as fictional characters would be shown as knights. After a series of phone calls, along with a written reply by Paul McGlinchey of the Supreme Knight's office, and the return of the screenplay, although receptive, the KFC made it clear that Kalache would make no donations from the film, and, as an organization, they could not mention the film project, but instead to contact Knights on an individual basis.
I was encountered by the Knights of Columbus in Toronto, the Ontario State's office, and some of the Knights were helpful and others really couldn't care less about merging media with morality.
This is not what Michael was expecting, but he still contacted individual Knights who were receptive as he began developing the project in Toronto. Known as the New York of the North, as the financial capital of Canada, the Greater Toronto Area, or GTA, has over 5 million people and is in the midst of an influx of foreign immigrants, making Roman Catholicism the dominant religion with more than 230 parishes. Silver Sword International began by professionally arranging the production with such organizations as the Ontario Media Development Corporation and Canadian Audio Visual Certification Office. Kalache, who is a devout practicing Catholic and who has been certified as a catechist teacher by the Archdiocese of Brooklyn and Queens over 20 years ago, utilized his experiences in classroom and community instruction and discussed common ideals and goals with those assisting him in the familiarizing of Toronto. As an inventor, having been awarded U.S. patents, Kalache created an opinion polling survey, or OPS, that enabled everyday people to make a difference in merging media with morality and prepared to deliver the word. While making arrangements to launch the OPS for the summer of 2003, he contacted the Archdiocese of Toronto, or AFT, because Intimate Fear required the use of Catholic churches for a few of its scenes. The Archbishop of Toronto is Aloysius Cardinal Ambrozic, who notoriously shies away from media, with the exception of giving an occasional homily during daily Mass in Canada, which is held at the AFT's St. Michael's Cathedral in downtown Toronto.
Cardinal Ambrozic was definitely an unapproachable cardinal. He does not run the archdiocese on the archdiocese level. Monsignor John Murphy does that. And that was disappointing because I wanted to bring the message of merging media with morality to the Archdiocese of Toronto, but I never had a chance to get to the cardinal.
Instead of Cardinal Ambrozic, Michael was directed to Dr. Suzanne Scorsone, who is the official spokesperson of the Archdiocese, as well as Director of Communications and Director of Catholic Family Life. Interestingly, Scorsone was chosen from her previous post as Commissioner of the Royal Commission on New Reproductive Technologies. Not only was the progressive Scorsone appointed to command these three high-profile positions, but she was also in charge of reading feature film screenplays.
Suzanne Scorsone and I had about 3 phone calls, and there was absolutely no way to get permission to shoot in the Archdiocese of Toronto churches without her go-ahead. She wields a tremendous amount of power at the AFT. I felt uncomfortable sending her the script, so as I have done in the past with the Knights of Columbus, I sent her a non-disclosure agreement and that the script could not be copied or discussed or retained.
Scorsone was put on notice through Kalache's first call with her that the screenplay, as usual, would only be loaned through a strict non-disclosure agreement, and it must be returned promptly, just as the KFC had done. It was accepted and submitted in this fashion, and prior to the screenplay return, via a disturbing email dated June 27, 2003, Suzanne Scorsone promptly declined permission to shoot the family film Intimate Fear in AFT churches. Scorsone then became too carried away in her arrogance and confirmed that she broke the non-disclosure agreement and called the Knights of Columbus Supreme's office at its Connecticut headquarters, and then claimed that the KFC said they did not know who Kalache was, which was, of course, untrue. Scorsone then took this fallacy and called Rick McLaughlin at the KFC Ontario State's office headquarters in Toronto, again breaking the non-disclosure, and this time made sure that the KFC knew that the project was not approved by the Cardinal himself, in order for her death sentence to spread throughout the Christian community, especially to the KFC, who are self-proclaimed protectors of the Church. This was the spark that set off the false notion that Intimate Fear and Kalache were not merging media with morality, and these fallacies quickly spread.
Scorsone did exactly what she needed to do to destroy my reputation and that of Silver Sword International. She simply did not want merging media with morality in her archdiocese, and did everything she could to eliminate it.
If Scorsone would not approve scenes to be shot in church, then Silver Sword International supporters and business associates would incorrectly assume that Intimate Fear was not a family-oriented film, when in fact it is indeed, and had been read by the KFC Supreme Office all along. Shortly thereafter, the opinion polling survey was launched starting directly with individual knights, but the falsehoods were highly effective, and the response was non-existent, prompting Kalache to perform an investigation of the archdiocese itself. In a series of blatantly egregious and arrogant maneuvers, Suzanne Scorsone abused her power and set out to kill the family-oriented film Intimate Fear. But she miscalculated in thinking that Michael A. Kalache would simply go away. Scorsone had no idea that Kalache was also an actor, and uniquely trained as one of the very few experts able to easily extract embedded images in art, having over 20 years of experience in deciphering such imagery. This experience would be used to uncover a series of international scandals that Kalache had yet to realize. As the Archdiocese of Toronto Communications Office, led by Scorsone, as well as several other major Catholic organizations, were covertly utilizing the very same techniques of embedded imagery programming. The stage was now set as Kalache began his investigation, while still persistently continuing the development of Intimate Fear.
I had to find out why that the AFT would be acting in this fashion. There's just no other reason other than it's, besides curiosity, was that I had a reputation that I had to try to bring back to being the truth, and falsehoods were spread. And I spent, when I was in Toronto, some parts of 5 months investigating the Archdiocese as an actor, dressing up in different outfits and going to different churches, wearing different clothes, and finding out everything that I possibly could. But I still didn't have the answer why, even though I searched.
After Scorsone's declination letter, Kalache met with an AFT priest, Father Kenneth Pierce, who warned Michael not to write Monsignor John Murphy, Ambrosic's main lieutenant, while they discussed the AFT, the Cardinal, the film, and Scorsone.
I had been to a mass in North York in the Toronto area, and I had seen a homily by Father Ken Pierce, and he seemed like a very affable guy. It was a good homily, so I asked if I could meet with him and discuss Intimate Fear with him, and he agreed, and we talked about Scorsone and the declination of shooting in churches. He found it very odd, but I wanted a priest to read the screenplay of Intimate Fear, and he agreed to take it on loan with a non-disclosure agreement. Unbelievably, he tells me that he's friends with Cardinal Ambrosic, who he referred to as Al, since childhood, and that the Archdiocese of Toronto simply does not want to have outside interference, especially from the Pope. And at the time, Pope John Paul II had geared World Youth Day to happen in Toronto, and it was a disaster, a financial disaster, and a lot of no-shows, and it was a big deal, and they're still dealing with it to this day.
The unwelcoming AFT created various scandals that led to the loss of tens of millions of dollars from the Archdiocese, as evidenced by the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops, or CCCB, handling fallout from these World Youth Day scandals. After reading Intimate Fear, Father Pierce gave Michael a positive note that said, "Good luck on this," on Pierce's own stationery. Michael would heed his advice and contact Scorsone in writing, but not until he was close to completing his investigation, because there was obviously much more to her declination letter, especially after the amount of disturbing information that continued to be fed to him. On December 3rd, 2003, Michael wrote Scorsone, confronting her with the issues of her breaking the non-disclosure and her slander, and also indicated that major damage had occurred from the fallacies that she spread. There was no reply.
Having sort of exhausted my investigation, it's now December 16, 2003, and I still don't have the answer why the Archdiocese of Toronto would act this way, and I would get a declination letter from Suzanne Scorsone. So I went to sleep that night and woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning for no reason, and there was a tremendous amount of light in the room at 3 o'clock in the morning, which I found very odd. But I went back to sleep. And then the next night, it happened again. And then it happened again for another night, 3 in a row, all at 3 o'clock in the morning. So this time I decided I'm going to pray. I don't know what else to do. So I mentioned a prayer of, "Do with me what you will. I'll take any job you have, whatever you want. I want to go back to sleep. I don't know what's going on. I don't want to be bothered with this." And I was clearly frustrated. So I went back to sleep, woke up a few hours later, and then went over to my computer. And I read the declination letter from Suzanne Scorsone. And the word imagery stood out this time. I had never seen this word quite this way before. Also, the sentence that Intimate Fear was not characteristic of church life in Ontario. So I said, wait a minute, if she's the director of communications, then the greatest form of communications would be the internet. And maybe I should go on their website and find out what their definition of imagery is. And that's when I did, and found the Archdiocese of Toronto's homepage to be a tremendously blasphemous picture of masturbation, Satanism, occult symbols, and you name it, right on the homepage.
It was in Scorsone's overconfidence that she inadvertently tipped Kalache off with her imagery word and inferences. Finally, the answer why the AFT would decline access to churches for family films was here. Michael used his skills as an expert in embed art and extracted several dozen images of meticulously embedded sexual and occult horror.
After I discovered the Archdiocese of Toronto painting on their website and found over 150 embeds, and there are all kinds of level embeds, many faces and others, but the ones that stand out the most would be this particular face in the red background, the face of the devil with horns, a face of the devil with upside down triangles in the right corner, in the trees, a demonic horned horse cow-looking face in the leaves. On the rear end of one of these beasts, a smiley face. On the right shoulder of the crippled boy, a face looking to the right, as you can see the nostrils and eyebrows, even the nose bridge extending past the shoulder. This boy is pointing this upside down A meaning the Antichrist, A meaning anarchy, not a crutch, but an A pointing at this particular Christ. This is a gigantic scene of masturbation. I mean, there are so many people that are fondling themselves and each other. If you saw these people at a bus stop somewhere in a conservative city, they'd probably be arrested. But if you look, you'll see this one man grabbing his crotch, and right next to it is this gigantic sperm smiling right into the crotch, looking right in with a nose sticking out. You have, throughout this painting, people grabbing each other, this woman pulling this man's hand onto her crotch, this couple, one guy's looking down the shirt of this woman, pulling her hand to him, and she's putting her hand in her genital area. On the right shoulder of the Christ, there is a horse, a dragon, blowing fire. There are numerous faces on the bodies of these people. There is a transsexual person who's holding the hands of this young boy, who is entertaining the fact of going to this red-dressed Jesus. And there's a face on the boy's body. That transsexual person has a phallic symbol that's apparent and has horizontal lines at the tip. The actual pant line of this transsexual person is very low. So it's some women features, some men features, short hair, but yet a feminine face, but very big hands. And you can't see the breasts because the person next to it is being covered by its arm. And that arm at the end of the hand is somebody sticking up its middle finger at the Christ, who's supposed to be the Christ.
Kalache immediately sought to remove the painting that the AFT effectively used to display as a trademark that put the world on notice that their site is being used as a programming portal. He then acted as an art dealer and discussed the AFT website at length with web designer Brian McIntosh from Base2Concepts.com, which was formerly CMAC Web Design. McIntosh admitted that he was the one that the AFT invited into the Archdiocese offices to requisition the original painting, of which they then approved. The AFT then promoted and executed this plan since 1999. This acronym, fittingly spelling RAPE, became the title of Kalache's investigative report. McIntosh gave Kalache the name of the artist who painted the work, Bergy, as a specialist from France, and that the AFT wanted very progressive themes to reflect approachability. In fact, Base2Concepts showcased this AFT website and original painting on their own site, stating that the goal was to balance reverence with approachability for this institution. Base2Concepts is now out of business.
Of course, there's no such thing as balancing reverence and approachability. You're either reverent or irreverent. So he gave me a lot of information, but the bottom line is that this was just the first in a long line of paintings.
Shortly thereafter, on January 1st, 2004, the Solemnity of the Virgin Mary, which is a feast day in the Catholic Church, AFT parishes handed out calendars entitled Church Art 2004, with monthly paintings by artist John Arvid Nelson. However, this was no ordinary calendar. Members of the occult world are obsessed with their numerology and will often conspire to mark disturbances and create special events in order to give them more meaning on specific dates, times, and places to spite all that is good, while being certain that the trademarks of the events are noticed by their brethren.
Here you see the Good Shepherd. Now, Jesus wasn't a shepherd, he was a carpenter. So therefore, you sometimes see Jesus and a flock of sheep, but that's because the sheep are significant of who we are, his sheep. But if you look carefully, you'll see that there's something wrong with what Jesus is wearing. If you look directly at his chest, you will see a large hanging phallic symbol, uncircumcised, coming out of his chest. Cylindrical, displaced, without testicles. These are forms of camouflage, in addition to the fact that you're using the emotional element of religion to fool people. Because, of course, a penis doesn't belong there. Jesus was a Jew who was circumcised, and this is uncircumcised. To the right, you can see that there's a sheep at the very corner, and at the rear end of this sheep, you see this three-quarter face, open mouth, little sheep right at the anal opening of this particular sheep. Above that, there's a gigantic ant or alien bug stuck to this particular sheep, showing alien, cryptic, reptilian, occult world. And then, if you look at the right sleeve of what's supposed to be Jesus, you see the snake head painted with an open mouth, sort of aiming toward this penis coming out of the chest. And you see how the penis is sort of semi-erect, aiming toward this particular mouth, signifying the possibility of fellatio. And then right on the crotch area of what's supposed to be Christ is a partially hidden face of some kind of demon. You have an eye, you have a nose, eyebrow, part of the smile, and part of it is covered by this particular cloak. This was on the cover of this particular calendar, and it literally was distributed to most of the people at the Archdiocese of Toronto, one of the largest archdioceses in the world. And when they turn the calendar to May, they get to see this all bright and not quite cheery.
The AFT headquarters is near the University of Toronto, home of the late Professor Marshall McLuhan, a legendary philosopher and devout Catholic, who made the world aware of the effects of modern communications, among other programming. McLuhan coined the oft-used phrases, global village, and the medium is the message. McLuhan was so respected that the Vatican appointed him consultor of the Pontifical Commission for Social Communications in 1973. He also wrote the introduction in 1974 of the first widely distributed book on embedded imagery written by his colleague and friend, Dr. Wilson Bryan Key. Dr. Key, an American, is internationally recognized for over 30 years of embedded imagery expertise as a former professor at the University of Western Ontario, and also draws from an advertising executive perspective. A member of Mensa and author of 5 books on the material, Dr. Key has been consulted by all forms of global media for decades, including testifying before the U.S. Senate and Canadian House of Commons as an expert witness, and has provided hundreds of lectures throughout the world as the original definitive word on the subject.
Marshall McLuhan was for many years a very dear, very close, and a very good friend. He wrote the preface to my first book. And I never realized, I had read all of his books, I had sat in on his classes and seminars, I never knew he was a Catholic. Until one night, Corinne, his wife, and I, the three of us were having dinner at his home. Corinne and I were joking about reincarnation. And Marshall recited an encyclical for some pope of the 12th century, who had declared that it was grounds for being kicked out of the church if you even talked about reincarnation. I almost fell off my chair because this is one of the most eminent philosophers of that period. And to hear him recite catechisms like a good Catholic surprised me.
Marshall McLuhan was so important in this particular relationship with embeds because he warned the world about them. He wrote the introduction to Dr. Wilson Bryan Key's book. He was appointed by the Vatican. He is a Torontonian, and the Archdiocese of Toronto is his parish. Yeah, it's been 25 years, 30 years, but they know there's no excuse. The Archdiocese of Toronto and the University of Toronto, which still has the McLuhan program at the university, are a stone's throw from each other. They're on virtually the same street. So the Archdiocese of Toronto knows what they're doing. These are embeds that are very calculated, planned, requisitioned, approved, promoted, and executed without question.
The answer that explained the AFT's actions was now clear. Little did Michael realize that the Archdiocese painting and calendar were just the beginning, as he would be led to many more works of religious embed art, particularly in his native United States, within giant religious publishing and other communication companies, thereby uncovering an international trend. Before these incredible pictures, a look at the details, explanations, and techniques of embedded imagery in art, as well as embeds in historical and contemporary works, and their cause and effect.
They're trying to influence everyone they can. And I'm sure, like Madison Avenue, they have demographic studies and cultural studies in various countries and what have you. They know what they're doing. And they're spending money to create more money and more power. That's their business.
Fainting is when an artist will take an image and make it faint, light, not press that hard. If I took a white sheet of paper and a pencil and I wrote "Drop Dead" on it, but I didn't press very hard with the pencil, and I gave it to you, at first glance you may just think it's a white sheet of paper. But if you looked at it a little bit closer, you'd say, wait a minute, that says "Drop Dead," but it's just very light. Now you're not going to let me off the hook because I didn't press that hard and I wasn't bold. It was subtle. And people insult people with subtleties. So fainting is important because we will finish what the mind sees as something else. A 666 where the first portion of the 6 is not quite bold enough, but the other two are. Of course you finish it, just like you finish a phone number and others. Fainting is very important. Fainting is seen in ways where the subconscious mind, because it picks up every single detail, the artist isn't really gambling by putting a faint particular portion of a pencil or a stroke or paint. Morphing is when you're taking a face or a object and you're stretching it, you're twisting it into something alien, not recognizable, something scary. Sort of like when you go to the fun house and there's a mirror and it makes you look wide or fat or short or whatever. And artists will use this in order to camouflage what you're seeing outside of your conscious mind. Angling is when an artist will use a particular angle of a face or a body and maybe make it a 3/4 face or a profile face in order for an additional element of conscious camouflage, just so it stays in the subconscious mind instead. Displacement is actually taking a particular object and putting it in some other place where it doesn't belong. You can take a phallic symbol, an erection or something, and you can put it in another part of the body, like on a shoulder or on a chest or, in another place. You can do this with all kinds of body parts together, and is a very effective tool in fooling the conscious mind. Artists have their own handwriting. Whether you're writing a book, whether you're directing a movie, acting, you have your own fingerprints that you're putting into your particular art. And don't expect to see a painter using font types that you find on your computer today. They're just not going to do it. They're trying to fool you consciously. So you're going to put their own handwriting. They're going to put sixes or other things together, or the word sex, in a way where you can't see it consciously. This is not the New Times Roman font or Arial or Helvetica or something. This is their handwriting, and they're going to utilize that to their advantage. One of the more common techniques would be the reappearing face. I mean, this thing appears constantly throughout embed art. Just faces, demonic faces, blown up faces, faces using parts of other bodies, faces using parts of other faces. The occult, satanic embed artist would be missing a tremendous tool in not using the reappearing face. And that's probably the number one thing you'll see with respect to embeds.
While Dr. Wilson Bryan Key has been uncovering art in the world of advertising for decades, he was also the discoverer of the Bigalo crucifix.
The Bigalo crucifix is on a 7-foot piece of wood. It's tempera painted on wood of the Christ figure on the cross of the crucifixion. And in the abdomen of the Christ figure is this erect penis with testicles. And that's pretty good stuff for the 12th century, because if the artist, who remains anonymous, had ever been caught, he would have ended his life on an Inquisition bonfire. The church and art, fine art, has used this kind of symbolism, not necessarily an erect penis, throughout our history. It's a part of art.
This figure of a mockery of Christ has utilized embedded imagery to subconsciously stimulate viewers for 700 years.
The church hierarchy would be enormously happy if it worked right. They're having a little problem the last 5 years over their homosexual priests, but to me, they're no different than any corporation. They operate in the interest of the corporation, and they're extremely skillful at what they do. And they were employing artists in this business of marketing religion long before Madison Avenue ever heard of it. So there's nothing strange to me about what they're doing. They're simply using the technology of the day as they were in the 15th century, the technology of that particular period, which was artists like Michelangelo and so forth.
Despite the great accomplishment of the Bigalo, it is no match for the incredible success of the famed San Damiano crucifix.
The San Damiano crucifix is an extremely popular Christian symbol, and the story is not necessarily accurately told. It is essentially a cross that St. Francis of Assisi prayed to, and which he said spoke to him, and essentially speaking to him, saying to rebuild my church, God saying rebuild my church. But there's some problems with this particular crucifix. And it was reflective of what St. Francis did. He actually went out and rebuilt churches with like hammer and nails and fixed windows and roofs and these things. And God kind of let this go for a while. After all, saints, well, he wasn't a saint yet, but saints are people, and people are flawed. And we make mistakes, we sin, we say the wrong things, we do the wrong things. And St. Francis's big mistake was believing that this particular cross, this crucifix, spoke to him and told him something. Because there's a problem with it, and the big problem is it is very much like the Bigalo crucifix, because it also has the underside of testicles and erection painted right in the abdomen of what is supposed to be Christ. In addition to that, Christ's eyes are open, his feet have blood coming out of them. How's he hanging on this cross? There are people to the left in boxes, there are people to the right in boxes, and it's supposedly showing a scene, but it is once again by an unknown Italian artist who wouldn't dare put his name on this particular painting because there would be repercussions should someone had consciously seen that particular erection on the abdomen. St. Francis eventually got another message from God, which was, rebuild my church, not the churches. You know, what are you doing? You made a mistake, not the physical churches. So the message, if any, that St. Francis of Assisi got from this particular cross was a false one, and people have to understand that. And if St. Francis, who is a man, again, and a flawed man, because saints are not perfect, although they try to achieve perfection, made a huge mistake. And I think that God lets this go because it shows how human he was. So St. Francis was duped. He was fooled. This cross is a blasphemous cross. This cross is in the possession of millions of people. And the Franciscans know of this story. When St. Francis died, the Clare nuns took it out of public view for 700 years, meaning they hid it for 700 years. Now, coming from a Catholic background, being Catholic educated, If anybody has ever been taught by nuns, you know that they're very smart. Sisters are very smart. And it doesn't take long for nuns to say, my goodness, this cross that St. Francis is praying to actually has an erection sitting on it. So, as soon as he died, they took it out of public view. They didn't know what to do with it. They didn't know whether to destroy it, to burn it, or whatever, because it apparently gave some kind of power from it. In Roman Catholicism, we don't pray to statues or to crosses. They don't talk to us. They're there strictly as reminders. And this is an example of how a saint, a great saint like St. Francis of Assisi, was fooled by this particular cross, so much so that he wasted a lot of time, energy, money in his mission of rebuilding actual physical churches. Instead of rebuilding the church, he misheard the message of Christ because he was transfixed on a cross that he was stimulated from and by. And since that cross came out again in 1957, displayed during Holy Week, the Vatican decides this is the time to bring this cross out, convinces the clerics to do so. It has been copied throughout the world. The hands of the saints near the erection gesture toward it as an introduction, as if they're actually speaking about it while holding variation phallic symbols of their own.
Conscious perception can lead you in one direction, and the subconscious can lead you in the opposite direction. They can operate independently or in a similar way. It's a part of the brain about which you know nothing at the conscious level, but which has an enormous effect upon your acceptance of cultural values, on your ability to, on your emotional involvements. You would not be really human without an unconscious mechanism. And as I say, there's no part of your brain we can point at and say this is the unconscious. But it's something, the effects of which you can measure and you can observe and you can validate.
The risk for the artist embedding images is that they can and will be found after conscious examination, and with ease by the embed expert, rendering them as regular images into the conscious mind.
In the center of the retina is a little dense group of cells called the fovea, and it's a cluster. And this fovea moves in saccades. When you have the perception that you're seeing the whole scene, you're not. You're seeing point to point to point. Now, wherever this fovea hits, you're going to perceive what it's hitting in the eye, the object it's reflecting at a conscious level. So if you were to put something in that aimed at the unconscious, you would plant it off fovea. Now, the early studies of this were done with billboard advertising. It's astonishing. I mean, these billboards, they work this thing out very scientifically. It's quite an expensive media. And then they came up with a machine called a pupillometer, which did the whole thing electronically, and made it very simple for any even relatively small advertising agency to test its ads with this. But it tracks what the eye is actually striking. And perceiving at a cognitive or at the unconscious level. The brain is taking in all the information. I think in perception you have to assume it's instantaneous, operating, they say, at the speed of light. And it takes in everything. It's total. Everything goes into your brain.
Artists use subconscious stimulation because they don't necessarily have to tell you what they're doing. It's fantastic. They could get you to buy a product. They can get you to buy a religion, buy into something. And by using a sexual stimuli in combination with horror, they can infer the blasphemy, if it's Christianity, for example, the horror side, but make you feel good about it because there's sex involved at the same time. And to do it all subconsciously or unconsciously is the key, because when you're looking at something, your eye is picking up every detail of it subconsciously, but you have to focus your fovea on the very pinpoint of the particular painting, picture, or walking down the street. And if you don't do that, you're not going to pick it up. You're not going to remember it consciously. Artists use this because it's extremely powerful. You get the message across without actually telling the person consciously.
These things have profound effects upon the subconscious. And if you can introduce these into an art form, you embed that idea of the art into the brain very, very deeply, and it will persist indefinitely. Otherwise, art is simply a picture, a drawing, a sculpture. It has no meaning at all beyond just simply something you observe.
Historical religious art also contained embeds, and such imagery has been used for centuries. Hieronymus Bosch, among others, is a classic example. leading all the way to eager copycat contemporary artists.
Hieronymus Bosch he wasn't afraid of hiding his embeds at all, or even camouflaging them, because essentially they're not hidden anyway. They are simply out there to see for your subconscious or unconscious mind, and he couldn't care less if you saw them consciously. So in the Garden of Earthly Delights, you see a whole bunch of activity going on with lots of naked people running around, and they're riding horses, the beasts, around in a circle. Many of them are naked, and you see this with a giant cat-looking thing with a very long pointed tail and someone on top of it naked, because Bosch knew that that's a symbol of sex. There are numerous cases of half man, half animal. You have owls, which are unclean animals. You have people being eaten by certain animals, which is sort of consistent with the future visit in Fatima, when Mary had shown hell and showed that hell was actually a very scary place where there are beasts that were unrecognizable, and they were sort of morphed together, and it was extremely scary for them to see. So Bosch was sort of dismissed as having a bad dream. But in actuality, he was a very good painter. He knew what he was doing, and he was just showing the symbols and times of that could be understood during that day. Leonardo da Vinci, obviously extremely well-known, famous artist, but there are many things that we don't normally know as a general population about Leonardo da Vinci. One is that he was most likely homosexual. He did in fact have sex with an underage boy, and went underneath the judge to essentially have this sort of dismissed. The Last Supper. Of course, this is an incredibly famous painting. He really didn't care if it was going to last very long, because it is falling apart. It had to be restored. It's very difficult to see. The big deal over this painting is that John is shown as a woman. Or is it really John? Well, actually, John is known as the apostle that Jesus loved. Peter and the one that he loved. So it's Peter and somebody else, which is always known to be John. So Da Vinci paints John as a woman, and that really is the embed. That's it right there. That's the shot against the church. I'm going to paint this thing, Da Vinci's saying. I'll paint it for you. But I'm going to do something in there that I want to do. And that is, I'm going to paint John as a woman. Not that there's any other code defined, it's just simply the fact that it's blasphemous. The church had to watch him, but they were intimidated by him. One of the examples is St. John the Baptist. St. John the Baptist, a man, but here painted by Da Vinci as an androgynous person. Half man, half woman, possibly almost all woman. If you look at this painting, you can see it's quite feminine. Now, if you're John the Baptist, do you like what he's doing? I don't think so, and neither would John the Apostle if looking at this particular picture. John the Apostle would not want to be shown or seen as effeminate or as a woman. So, an excellent story with respect to the Da Vinci Code, but fiction, in a sense that, okay, John's a woman, but it's so feminine that we're going to maybe make her something out to be Mary Magdalene, and then we're going to use a terrific caper to find out that she's really the cup of Christ and she's the Holy Grail. An excellent story in the fact that it's interesting, certainly not true, but all started hundreds of years ago by Da Vinci adding the embed and making John essentially a woman, just to potshot the church, because he is the one that Jesus loved, meaning loved as a brother, not as a lover. But Da Vinci would, of course, paint it as a lover, and has a track record of painting androgynous saints, people, and others for the church. Jules Van Cleef was a devoted fan of Da Vinci and painted this scene of child pornography. These are not cherubs. They are wingless boys, one of which is John the Baptist, and the other, of course, is Jesus Christ, kissing and feeling each other in the nude. This painting was funded by Pompagus Oko, a wealthy banker whose actual hands were used by Van Cleef as the true model for the hands of the Christ and the Baptist. Another Renaissance artist who was clearly homosexual was Sandro Botticelli. By the virtue of his nice-sounding name, Botticelli, everybody thinks that everything he's painted must be fantastic. I mean, he, of course, was a Renaissance artist. This was the time of the genius artists, and everything he did was absolutely spectacular. But that's not the case. At that time, homosexuality was frowned upon. In many cases, it was illegal, especially with underage children. It was illegal. So you have here a famous painting from Sandro Botticelli, Adoration of the Magi. But a lot of things are going on here that are inappropriate. First of all, this is supposed to be the little town of Bethlehem, but yet there are Roman columns in the background. And a lot of people dressed outside of their particular time. He instilled two homosexual scenes inside this painting. The first one is to the left. A lot of times you'll see a horse or an animal to signify sex. This one has a horse peering in on the left side of this particular painting, and two guys grasping each other, one right from behind, left hand and right hand, one on the forearm, one on the shoulder area, and they're both wearing really, really short skirts. As you can see, the foot of the guy behind the person in the front has his heel raised, as if he's about to drive something behind this guy. You have to watch all of the places, all of the pieces of the body. Again, everything is planned, everything is sketched. The man in the front is holding a very long sword right through his crotch area, and part of it is sticking up. The person on the left of them is holding another phallic symbol and pointing his hand of, hey, what's going on here? Meaning, let's look over to our left. But these guys really don't care what's happening behind them. I mean, after all, this is the birth of Christ, and this is a special time. 3 wise men are in town who are the sons of the Medici family that actually commissioned the painting. But they don't care about that. They care about fooling around. If you look at the man who's grabbing the one in the front, his eye is clearly looking down at the man's crotch. He has no care whatsoever what's going on behind them. And then across the way, you have another man who is on his knees, bending over, bending forward. And he's turned around looking up at a man behind him. And the man behind him has his hips rotated, his knee bent out, and his heels clicked toward each other, as if his torso is about to be engaged in a forward motion. This is hidden by some person, thing, jumping in between to stop what you see here. But that person actually has no face, hiding what's going on behind that particular scenario in front of Christ. The person who is kneeling is looking back and up at the person who's doing this rotation. And the person who's doing the rotation behind them is looking down at that particular person. So there's a bit of surprise, an element of surprise. Joseph is there, but he's looking quite perturbed. He's like, oh man, how am I going to pay for this guy? I don't know what's going on. He doesn't look very happy. Behind them are these 2 big boulders. What are boulders doing in the manger? This is some kind of concoction of a manger, because Botticelli is trying to do whatever he can to put in blasphemous embeds into this painting. So besides the homosexual scenes, he puts in 2 boulders, both looking to the left, profile faces. One of them even has a little bit of hay or hair sticking out of the nose. That is on top of one that's being kind of squashed, and you can see the outline of the eyes and the nose with a long beak type of nose. And Joseph is just sitting right, his elbows right next to it, and it's part of the scene. As you move over to the right of this painting, you have, of course, the androgynous person. A person, not male, not female. Is he or she pregnant? What is it? Is it a fat guy? Is it a pregnant woman? Actually, it's Botticelli looking directly at you. Doesn't care what's happening over here with Christ. And if you look in the stomach area, you see, again, the A for Antichrist. So, suggestion that that could have been the Antichrist, or it should have been the Antichrist. Those particular occult symbols, with the addition of homosexuality, was a prevalent way to have Renaissance artists pull a fast one on the church. As much as the church at that time would like to watch these guys, they thought that they were creators, and it was far too hard for the church to police this. The Franciscans in Mount Vernon, New York have prayers to St. Anthony, and they utilize these prayers by showing a particular painting of St. Anthony and the infant Jesus. But this is no ordinary painting. This is the infant Jesus inviting St. Anthony to suck his left thumb into the position of the crotch area. That's inferring, once again, fellatio. And if you look at the bottom of this particular painting, you see a ghostly phallic symbol, including testicles, shaft, head of a penis, and unfortunately an ejaculation mess on the table. Next to the table is the left foot of the baby Jesus, who has a cloth over his foot, and this is a three-quarter face with an open mouth, sort of accepting this particular mess that's happening there. So you have a lot of oral sex connotations. In fact, sex is on the mind of baby Jesus here because it's drawn into the mind, into the hair of the Jesus figure, as you can see clearly, S, E, and X, along with the left side of his face, a very demonic profile face, including an eye, red lips, teeth, looking at St. Anthony as he's going to attack him or something. In addition to that, there are numerous faces coming from behind the baby Jesus, and an utterly blasphemous sexual scene, and should not be part of prayer, especially the Franciscans.
When your brain tells you you know what you're doing and you've solved the problem, go back and take another look, because your brain tricks you very, very often. And we are in the business of tricking brains in our merchandising, advertising, and the selling of everything from religion to underarm deodorants. And we're very ill-equipped, and I assume on purpose. This stuff is not taught in universities, because if it did, there'd be a hell of a clamor publicly for the media people and perhaps the religions to stop it.
People make the mistake of accepting the imagery, but it is carefully planned to fool the viewer, who accepts the art by feeling it is harmless, when it is not.
Art is planned. We plan every single minute detail to whatever we're doing, whether we're painting, whether we're writing, whether we're making a movie, acting, singing. And it's no different in the embeds that artists will use in their particular works or sculptures or paintings or photographs. It's all planned. We don't throw paint around or throw words around or throw people around and just that's the way that it happened. That's not the case, especially with Renaissance artists and artists of a bygone era who first sketched out exactly what they were thinking about before they would get anyone near to paint those particular images. Tremendous planning went into these paintings, and it took years to actually finish them. So even if they were going in the wrong direction, they surely would fix it, but they didn't. They kept with the direction that was in the planning the entire time. We plan every single minute detail. Don't think that's not the case. Also, embedded images always turn out to be the same thing to everyone, once the conscious mind identifies it. The ridiculous excuse of staring at something long enough and you'll see something is a false challenge by deceptive creators, as embeds will only be seen if they're actually placed there. You can stare at a painted wall until the end of time and nothing will be seen because nothing was purposely embedded. In fact, these organizations would never spend so much money and time on the process if it weren't incredibly effective.
Dr. Stanley Monteith is the nationally syndicated talk show host of Radio Liberty, an accomplished author and lecturer on geopolitics, who has spent more than 30 years researching the causes for America's spiritual and moral decline.
You'll find these things in stained glass windows. You look at it every day, it'll have no significance at all to you. On the other hand, when somebody points it out to you, it may have a sexual significance, or there may even be a demonic significance to it. Many times, for instance, a star will be there, but the star will have, rather than the point upward, it'll be downward, which of course is a satanic emblem. And when you begin to understand what these emblems are, the frequency many times, whether it's the number 666 are used, we see this repeatedly in all sorts of media, and yet unless somebody points them out to us, we do not recognize them. St. Paul in the book of Thessalonians referred to the mystery of iniquity. There really is another dimension out there, which most people are totally unaware of, and it's really the realm in which the spiritual battle for the souls of men is being fought. Now, what people do not understand is that these truly demonic forces do influence so much of what's going on today. Most people believe we're involved in a political battle, or an ideological battle, or a cultural battle. And I don't believe that at all. I believe we're involved in a spiritual battle that's being fought on a political, ideological, and cultural basis. And until people recognize where this real battle is, it's a spiritual battlefield, we can't understand anything that's going on today.
Probably much in the same way that a modern artist, a capable, creative, skilled artist, comparably his relationship with Madison Avenue corporations. You're working for the church if you expect to eat regularly, and certainly in the Middle Ages and Renaissance. And the church hired artists. And they didn't hire them because they liked them particularly. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of evidence they distrusted them intensely. Michelangelo had a whole dozen priests follow him around at the instructions of the Pope to make sure he didn't put anything naughty up on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel.
Malachi Martin, who was a Jesuit priest and worked at the highest levels of the Vatican, wrote a book entitled Windswept House, in which he talked about the fact that there were Roman Catholic clerics who were involved in the worship of Satan and liked it, the fact that there were both bishops and priests who sodomized children and sodomized one another.
I don't believe the Nazis were any different than the church or a corporation on Madison Avenue, in that they were pursuing power and money that makes power. And they Goebbels, I think in his diary, talks about the use of the occult. This was used just as a weapon, just a tool, much the same way the Vatican uses the various saints, simply a device, a modus operandi, to achieve an end, the end being loyalty to the Third Reich.
The whole philosophy of Nazism came out of the Thule Society, which was in Bavaria in the 1800s. And this all originated with a woman named Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, who was the founder of the Theosophical Society. And she wrote a book called The Secret Doctrine, in which she said that Lucifer was God. And Adolf Hitler read Madame Blavatsky's book, The Secret Doctrine, nightly. In fact, I'm told that in the National Archives, a copy of that, Hitler's Secret Doctrine is there with all sorts of markings in the margin. But this is the source of Hitler's tremendous power, the way he was able to control crowds, and they would stand there for 4 or 5 hours and listen to him. This is the way he was able to control the minds of the other people. And until you understand the occult foundation of the Nazi movement and of the SS, you cannot understand their intense hatred of Jews and Christians and of course, the horror that resulted from their effort to apply these demonic principles to humanity and mankind.
Adolf Hitler's henchman, Goebbels, Joseph Goebbels, was obviously a tremendous man of propaganda skill, and he utilized embeds, which were around for centuries, to really dupe an entire nation. I mean, Germany was fooled by the Nazis, and the occult scenario that followed through the Nazis, through Adolf Hitler, was incorporated into the actual material and propaganda posters and paintings that were shown to the general public in Germany. Here is a painting, and this is a very high-level embed. Most of the embeds that I've been showing here are low level. Zeros, 1, 2, 3 at the top range, meaning that they're not quite faint, they're quite open. You still can't see them consciously right away, but once shown, there they are. This is a little harder, because back in those days, these guys couldn't risk being caught by anybody in Germany, so therefore you would have an artist come in, really painting it in, and you see another eye by his ear, and a nose and mouth on his face. It's there as horror. It's there to assert the dominance of Hitler and the past. The reason why I mention Nazi propaganda, not just because it's interesting, but because the church knew about embeds, not only from the Bigalo crucifix 700 years ago, not only from San Damiano 700 years ago, but through what happened in Nazi Germany. I mean, Hitler used the occult to program his nation at that time. the occult embeds, extremely powerful stuff. And there's no excuse. They can't say, hey, we didn't know. They did know about it. They watched it, and they knew Goebbels was a bad guy, and that he used his embeds in propaganda to control the people. So the church should not be exonerated. They cannot use the excuse of ineptitude.
The programming effect is now complete, as the viewer will now give the horror elements acceptance and correlate them with whatever the initial message was within the picture, from Jesus Christ to Hitler. It's obvious that embedded images have no place in the church. But what are the negative effects of viewing occult, horror, and pornographic images on people, particularly children, especially coming from trustworthy religious institutions and companies?
Embedded images can have a profound impact on our subconscious, whether we realize it or not. And if we see pictures that depict Christ, and then, of course, there are things there that suggest that he is not divine, begins to challenge the very foundation of our religious faith and destroy what we believe in. And once you've destroyed the Christian belief of an individual, it's not that they believe nothing. They will begin to believe anything, and many of these people then will begin to embrace these alternative religions, which is one of the major problems we have within our society today.
Religion is an incredibly emotional thing, and the artist will use this emotional element of religion to make sure that you are completely susceptible to obtaining a conscious view of what they're trying to get into your subconscious mind. In other words, I'm not going to believe it because it's my Jesus. It's my church. It's my artist. I like this thing. I don't see it. I don't want to see it, and whatever. That emotional element of religion is probably the number one reason why people don't have these images go into the conscious mind, and why artists can get away with level 0, 1, and 2, and 3 low-level embeds. Because people just don't want to see it there. It's too hard to take.
Dr. Mark Oster is an expert in clinical psychology and hypnosis, was former professor from the Adler School of Professional Psychology, and is now teaching at Argosy University. Dr. Oster is the past president of the American Society of Clinical Hypnosis, having been called as an expert witness in numerous cases of litigation, and has been consulted through many appearances in media.
Hypnosis involves 3 elements. The first is that the individual needs to be able to focus their attention or pay attention very, very intently. The second is they have to be able to do that to such a degree that they become unaware of unimportant distractions going on around them. And then finally, the third element is an increase in suggestibility.
You can put an idea or an instruction or a value into a person's memory and have it trip off a week, 2 weeks, a month, 3 months, maybe even longer. You see an ad that has an embed in the art. 3 months later, you go into a supermarket and you buy the product. You have no memory of why you did that, what caused it.
Dr. Judith Reisman is a world-renowned author, lecturer, and expert in child psychology and the harmful negative effects of pornography. She is the president of the Institute for Media Education, author of the U.S. Department of Justice Juvenile Justice Study, and has been a consultant to 4 U.S. Department of Justice administrations, the U.S. Department of Education, as well as the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
When a child is abused by a trusted source, by teachers, by the way, teachers are highly involved in sexual abuse of children today. Teachers in parochial schools, private schools, public schools. When it's a family member, a father, a stepfather, or a mother, we have that happen. When it is a priest or any other member of clergy who is violating the integrity of that child's vision of themselves as a child of God, and wiping out their sense of protection and their sense of innocence, then you're talking about wreaking carnage on a child's life.
Children are more susceptible or predisposed to hypnosis or hypnotic-like experiences because they haven't learned to develop the critical thinking that adults have, and so they tend to accept things as it's presented to them in a very literal way. Children are more fantasy prone than adults are, and therefore they don't critically analyze what's being presented to them as good, bad, or otherwise. They accept things as they are.
One of the biggest problems, really, with pornographic stimuli is that the human brain has to rationalize everything that it does. And most of what we are doing as a result of pornography is not at all conscious. And so there's no way that the individual can actually understand why they have done what they have done. So they give a rationalization, a logical rationalization for why they left their wife of 20 years or why they have sexually molested a child and that sort of thing. When you've embedded into the human brain, mind, and memory, subconscious experiences, lusts, and desires, the conscious mind then must give some sort of rationale for that. So you become directed by all sorts of things, and you have no idea that that's what's really lurking in the back, in the most primitive areas of the human brain.
If we have a predatory individual who preys on people, this person might then learn hypnosis as a way to become a better predator, learn language as we teach it to use it in a way to be a better predator with people as well. Similarly, if you take that same predatory individual, they may also look for different tools or other things that they could use, pictures, totems, photographs, so forth. Because of the social psychological influence of their position of authority, using that material, inappropriate material, will have a greater impact on the individual because of who's presenting it and what their motivation is.
It's fairly well known that Hitler Germany was the first, or the origin of massive programming. Propaganda was used by Goebbels, who was an excellent propagandist. But Hitler himself was talking about the fact that that it was critical in order to get the masses to adhere to and do lockstep to his belief system. It was critical, he said, to expose the masses to sexual material, very, very graphic sexual material and grotesque material at the same time. In that way, you capture, he said, the masses, and that was the propaganda that was part of Goebbels' plan.
Symbols and pictures can create a hypnotic effect much in the way that words and language and other things can as well. It's a social psychological phenomenon. When an individual walks into a room or into a building or into any place where there are books, pictures, certificates, drawings, paintings, and so forth, those tell the person something about what's expected of them or what they can expect to experience when they come there. And if those symbols or pictures or artifacts or what have you have particular intent or meaning that the person had who placed them there, that's likely to draw or pull for that in the individual looking at these things. It creates an expectancy of what you should expect to have happen, and oftentimes that's exactly what happens.
In fact, embedded imagery and its subsequent programming effect is so very real indeed that in the United States, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms enacted laws against the same uninformed techniques of deception.
If an individual is predatory, they want to minimize the amount of disclosure and the amount of consent so that you don't know what's going to happen. You're not prepared for that, and they can then proceed to do what they do without your awareness.
People in Western civilization have certain inhibitions as far as sexual promiscuity, but you can break down those inhibitions by horror. Horror basically frightens us. It gets access to our subconscious, and then introducing sexual ideas, you can actually break down the normal inhibitions, and you end up with an immoral society such as we have today, where we have over 60 million people in the United States today with a sexually transmitted viral disease.
I was looking at the role of sexologists in training priests in the Catholic Church, which I thought was pretty bizarre. And it turned out that there were certain seminaries where the priests were themselves being exposed to this sexual attitude restructuring, which is the showing of pornographic films in the seminaries to people, men who were there to become priests. Now, showing the pornographic material in the seminary then predisposes the priest to high levels of, excuse me, but arousal. I mean, that's what happens. That's what pornography is designed to do. If indeed they're in a place then where they're being told that this is all normal and natural and they can act this out, well, once that young man goes down that path, he's subject to all sorts of problems following that. And one of the big problems, of course, would be child sexual abuse of children. There are all kinds of vulnerable children about that he is then there to mentor, to pastor. In the process of doing that, you can have people then who have had these experiences, have been sexualized by the pornographic material, who have been sexually molested themselves as priests by perhaps the other priests above them or whoever, and who will then act out certainly on the children that are in charge. They've been told that the views of the church are archaic, that the views of the church have no relevance in science, that science has proved that you can be sexually active, and you can be sexually active with children without any harm to those children. They have conflicting belief systems going, both of them being taught to them in the church system, one by the old church, one by the, quote, new church, the sexology. They will, many of them, yield to the new church.
Pedophilia is not simply limited to the Catholic Church. It involves the Protestant Church as well. It permeates every aspect of our society and violates the souls of children.
I don't for a moment believe that the predatory priest who was assaulting small children, raping them and so forth, is representative of the priesthood. There are a lot of very fine men and women who make their lives in the church and lead very good lives, very constructive lives. But you will find that minority of predator in every strata of society. It's not unique to the priesthood, and except it's got an awful lot of publicity in the last few years. And the main problem I see is that the church knew about it, has known about it for a long time, and has covered it up. Now, that's a felony. Any social worker in this country or a psychologist who has evidence through his treatment with the patient is involved in this kind of felonious act, must report that. It's a law. And every state in the union will put him in jail if he does not report it. So you have the church actually acting in a criminal capacity, violating the laws of the land. I think that's intolerable. But I wouldn't blame this on the rank and file priesthood or the nuns. Most of them are pretty decent people. But you have this minority, which will always been there, so presumably will always be here. But they have to be controlled, they have to be dealt with. And the church has abrogated that role completely. It has covered up, pretended it didn't happen, bought their way out of it through payoffs, and I think they should be stepped on very, very severely.
The hush culture that we have in the Catholic Church is a big problem. Something I call good Catholic syndrome is sort of suffered by the majority of Catholics, because be a good Catholic, sweep it under the rug, and don't harm the church, and everything's going to be okay, and we can't make any waves because it'll make the church look bad. And this is exactly what evil is expecting. It's what they want. They don't want anybody to stand up and say anything. They certainly don't want you to be like Jesus and stand from the rooftops or proclaim the problems in public. They want you to be quiet. And Catholics are led to believe this, and I'm saying this as a devout Catholic, are led to believe this, and it's wrong. We have become the greatest institution in the history of religion for carpet sweeping, and that's something that cannot continue.
They just hope that the question will go away. If you don't confirm or deny why there's no controversy. The one thing is, of course, the last thing they want is a controversy, because that would cause or draw people's attention to what's really going on.
Hoping that the AFT painting and calendar were the only pieces of art involved, Kalache took immediate steps to inform church officials and have them removed. In December 2003, Michael called the CCCB and spoke with Monsignor Peter Schonenbach, who handles sexual abuse cases stemming from those that plagued Canada in the 1990s. The Monsignor advised Michael to contact the papal nuncio, Archbishop Luigi Ventura, who is the Vatican's ambassador to Canada and stationed in Ottawa, Ontario. Kalache wrote to the nuncio, but received no reply, forcing him to recontact the office. He was immediately transferred to Ventura's associate, Father Tom Cassidy.
He said, there is no way we're going to be handling this thing. No way. go to the Vatican or go to Cardinal Ambrozic.
Father Cassidy gave Michael the Vatican number of the highest officer possible to handle such misconduct, Archbishop Francesco Monterisi, the General Secretary of the Congregation of Bishops of Rome. Calace called Monsignor Schonenbach at the CCCB again, who was very surprised that the papal nuncio would not assist him.
Schonenbach was quite perturbed by this. He said, "You mean they're not actually helping you?" "Well, you know what? I have the direct extension to Cardinal Ambrozic, and he gave me that direct extension." We were trying to find a way to let Cardinal Ambrozic know what was going on, just in case he didn't know, because Schonenbach said that he knows Cardinal Ambrozic and that he would go through the roof if he knew about these scandals. So I believed that. So I set up a letter, I set up a time, and I faxed over to get it on his desk, because any mail would be intercepted at the Archdiocese of Toronto and go to Murphy. So I needed to get this to Ambrozic. And I faxed it over there, but nothing was done, with the exception of Murphy's homily a few days later.
On January 7, 2004, Calace informed Cardinal Ambrozic in writing and asked for a reply, but none was received. In fact, Cardinal Ambrozic's lieutenant, Monsignor John Murphy, who undoubtedly read this letter, gave a shocking homily just a few days later during nationally televised daily Mass in Canada.
This homily I call the homily from hell. Sometimes Catholic priests just are bad guys. We have to admit this. There's evil at the highest levels of the church. And this homily was so perfectly constructed, so blasphemous, that at the very end, he exclaims that while Christ is the same, we're not. And what he's essentially doing is that he's separating Christ, the Holy Spirit, and God, and there is no Blessed Trinity, and since we're different, we have to progress, we have to change. These are bad times. I mention this because that was the answer.
Michael waited until January 19, 2004, and then informed Archbishop Monterisi at the Vatican. Again, no reply was given. As yet, the third office of the Church expected Michael to remain quiet and go away. But he persisted.
John Turner is a former Prime Minister of Canada and considered the father of abortion in Canada. And the Cardinals' Dinner 2001, none other than the Office of Communications, run by Suzanne Scorsone, appointed John Turner to be the chairman of the Cardinals' Dinner. And that's a very high-profile post. It's undeniably showing that the Archdiocese of Toronto is tolerant on abortion. A few pro-life groups caught this, but it was not something that was stopped. Suzanne Scorsone wrote a letter palliating the appointment of Turner, saying everything was okay, and that was it. And Turner served as the chairman of the Cardinals' Dinner. Clearly, the Archdiocese in 1999, with the requisition, approval, promotion, and execution of the painting on their website, which for everybody to see, including children, on the homepage, followed by John Turner being appointed as the chairman of the Cardinals' Dinner in 2001, and then in 2002, the complete failure of World Youth Day is a method of destruction of the Archdiocese of Toronto to push them into a mode of progressiveness and change.
Calace tried to resolve the issues internally, but no communications were received by him in return. As an American, he naturally wondered if the same occult and sexual imagery was being utilized in the United States. And it was here that such discoveries made the original scandals pale in comparison. In order for a widespread distribution of embedded occult and pornographic imagery to occur other than by use of the Internet, the Oregon Catholic Press, run by publisher John Lim and distributed to approximately 2 of every 3 U.S. archdioceses, would accomplish this by putting millions of copies of such imagery on the covers of their hymnals and missals in the pews of American churches.
The Oregon Catholic Press in 2004 published a music issue which ended up in approximately 2 out of every 3 churches in the United States, in addition to the possibility of other global distribution. And this particular missile was discovered by my young daughter, who asked me if there were scary faces inside of it during a mass at Holy Name of Westchester, in Westchester, New York. It is worse than that, because this is not just a wildly exploding red cross. This is indeed, at the bottom, the face of what is the devil looking right at you, with a smirk on his face, a L-shaped type of a nose, eyes, jawline, shoulders, and exploding out of the head are three faces. One of them, as you can see by this particular eye, is identified looking to the left with an open mouth, connected to another, as you can see by this eye, with an open mouth looking to the left, and then this other face with a revolver chamber as part of its head. Anybody who understands guns and ammunition, you'll see that this is the top loading scenario for revolver. There's also a hole in the head of this third face, which has this blue hair, a little sideburn area, and it also has an open mouth. The explosion comes from the center of this cross, and the message here is clearly suicide. Blow your brains out. And the smirk that the devil figure at the bottom is showing you is certainly egging you on to take care of this and do this particular job. There is a 666 mixed in with these musical notes, which are essentially just types of camouflage that you have to look through in order to see some of these elements. Not just blasphemy, but a tremendous amount of danger in the fact that there could have been children who have a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head after seeing this particular painting, because the painting is cartoon-like. It's aimed at kids. And to put a revolver chamber on a cross that's exploding and the head of Satan and three other faces with open mouths and a bullet hole in the head and a 666, this is not Catholic, this isn't Christian, and is extremely dangerous.
After seeing these horrifying images on the hymnal, Michael checked the OCP website to see if they were distributing the material on a global basis, and found more of the same embeds on their other worship materials.
The 2004 companion missile from the Oregon Catholic Press also incorporated the same essential scene from the Bigalo crucifix and the San Damiano crucifix. As you can see, clearly the abdomen of Christ is the underside of a penis and testicles, although the center portion of this particular penis is not there as it is in the Bigalo crucifix. But it's clearly defined. There are other things regarding this particular painting which seems to look as if it's a copycat painting of the Bigalo and San Damiano, as there are saints from each side of the picture. One is in red to the right, staring directly at this phallic symbol. And there are others. There's one in the what's supposed to be the eagle representative of the gospel, and that also, the tail and the body of this particular eagle is also a phallic symbol. And there is a ghostly-looking face with its arms extended left and right. It's a little bit of a pug nose and eyes that are in brown to try to throw off the fact that it's there. Once again, there is displacement being used. Things are not where they're supposed to be. This is the Catholic Church. This is the emotional element of religion, and people are passing up these particular items. They're seeing them unconsciously and subconsciously, but they're not seeing them consciously. The Heritage Missile from the Oregon Catholic Press came out in 2004, and it was so effective that they renewed it again for 2005 with the exact same picture. And as you can see here, you have something that resembles Jesus, but there's a mistake. The right hand of God is incredibly symbolic, and if there's a way for this to be utilized in a blasphemous fashion, the predatory artist will, of course, take advantage of it. And if you look carefully, this is not really a hand. You can see that it is indeed a rat with a couple of curled legs. In addition, underneath the neck, you have sort of like a speakeasy doorway opening in a small rectangle of just the very mean eyebrows, eyes, and bridge of the nose face underneath the shadow of the chin.
Working with the OCP as well as on his own, Steve Spammer, a Marianist brother, has been supplying the world with numerous deformed artwork for many years.
Steve Spammer has a nasty habit of putting satanic symbols in his artwork, one of which is the 666, which in Revelation is the sign of the beast. In this particular painting, this red fire and blood painting of Jesus on the cross has twin 666s on each side of the cross. Spammer has, in many paintings, pictured Jesus with oblong arms, gigantic hands, and faces that are really blasphemous. I mean, in this particular face, he looks like he's drunk. His hands are up in the air like, oh, what do you want me to do? And on each side of him, there are a couple of scenes of people who are extremely close to each other. So close that, their hips are well within the rear ends of each other during what is an elliptical shape where Jesus has these bandages wrapped around him. The elliptical shape is also used as a symbol of the vaginal opening. Another of Spammer's works is this black and white version of Jesus essentially inviting a couple of people to something, perhaps a rendezvous in the desert or what have you, and it apparently has excited one of the members. As you can see, there's a uncircumcised phallic symbol coming out of the leg of one of the invitees. Steve Spammer has also decided to paint artwork that is from a historical perspective, such as this Pietà taken from Michelangelo's sculpture. If you notice, you see Mary's legs are extremely wide, spread wide open, which is inappropriate. And in addition, most of all, it's Jesus with, once again, his abdomen having the underside of a penis, such as the Bigallo crucifix and the San Damiano crucifix. Another 666, sometimes the sixes are backwards. This is well known throughout the art. You can make them upside down, inside out. But you see here an androgynous person. You don't know if this is a man or a woman, in a wild outfit, looking to the sky in a very harsh gray atmosphere, and 3 sixes sitting right in front of it. Steve Spammer, again, loves to show Jesus as someone who's very tired, or high, or drunk, or out of his mind, not quite thinking, and he does this with his drooping nose and jowls and eyes. And here you have Jesus administering to a man. You don't see the man's face, but obviously he's right in the crotch region of Christ. In addition to that, Jesus has a tail. Steve Spammer's recollection of Jesus and Pontius Pilate. You see Pontius Pilate sitting on some kind of a judge's chair, and he has puckered lips and some kind of microphone-looking thing in front of him. And Jesus is very submissive. But if you look, you'll see that hanging down from the chair of Pontius Pilate is a flaccid phallic symbol, inviting Jesus to perhaps perform something to get off on this particular crime that he committed. Steve Spammer has painted the dove coming in from the heavens, but he didn't quite make it. This dead dove with the closed eye has been overcome by the 3 six-pointed stars and the fire of hell and Satan. The fruit of the vine would, of course, encompass 666 as well. As you can see, there are 3 of them embedded, some upside down, some inside out, but right in the picture of this particular tree. Steve Spammer also has been featured with the Oregon Catholic Press on various different publications, hymnals and missals, and on today's missal for Pentecost, he has drawn an open-eyed Jesus, looking kind of goofy, with blood pouring out of his side, a face on his torso, and all of this through an elliptical shape, a vaginal shape, while a dove, a mockery of a dove, is also a fish in combination looking at this particular scene. The Oregon Catholic Press brought out the Today's Missal, done again by Steve Spammer, and this one's for Lent. And as you can see, Spammer just cannot get away from 666. He just puts in another 3 sixes wrapped around in between this Christ figure and stained glass. And at the end of these sixes would be what resembles a snake face, snake head, with a tongue inside each one of them. On top of that, you have what's supposed to be Christ, or is this an old man from the Bowery? He has a Bowery hat on, he has a band around the hat, he has discolored hands, one's one color, one's the other, one's a foot's different color. And he could be taken. I mean, we can get him, we can get Jesus. He's an old man, it's all over. We can get him. That's the message that's being shown. Jesus is a bum, and 666 is preventing him from getting to the church, to the stained glass behind him. The Oregon Catholic Press has contacted Steve Spammer to paint a very special painting for their 2005 music issue. The missal has what looks to be three people in a band playing something, but if you look, you see a lot of alien inference here. There is a purple man who is really connected to the bongo player. It's almost as if this is a two-headed bongo player. It has to be, because exactly where would this man be? Where is his torso? What is he playing? He is really into the bongo player from behind. What is he doing with his hands? Where are his hands? Where is his torso? So you find this to be something that is wrong with the picture. And you remember what's wrong with the picture, so you subconsciously go back to it, often even after you haven't seen it after the first time. That's not the bad part about this, though. It's bad enough. But as you come over to the woman who is playing a violin, and as a child when I grew up, my grandfather made violins and told me that they are in a shape of a woman, an hourglass shape, and very sensual and has grooves and what have you. So it could be a sexual scenario that might be happening. So I'm watching this violin carefully, and the second mistake that the person makes is that you look at the hand, the left hand of the woman playing the violin, and you'll see that it's backward. So if you look at her chin, you see that the violin's not actually under her chin. So you're thinking now, okay, subconsciously, unconsciously, that she's actually not playing the violin at all. And then you move to the right hand, which is the key in deciphering the extraction of this particular painting. And the right hand isn't holding the bow. It's actually pressing the bow against her breast. So then you get a chance to look at the top of her hand, and her thumb is not on the bow. You'd have to hold the bow together with your index finger and your thumb, but it's not. It's separated because she's actually guiding in something into the groove of this sensual violin, and what she is guiding into it is a flat-out erection, phallic symbol, complete with slightly discolored scrotum and penis and cap, knob, whatever you want to call it, together, completely outlined in black. In other words, this is what we would call a level 0 embed. There's absolutely nothing stopping anybody from seeing this except the emotional element of religion, displacement, because this particular penis is displaced. It shouldn't be where it is. But throughout this entire painting, you see that there are people who are up to no good. There's sexual inference, starting from this two-headed bongo player person, and the fact that that particular phallic symbol could be representative of what's going on behind the bongo player. Then, the OCP produced a 2006 music issue with the cover painted by Steve Spammer, showcasing the wild and controversial liturgical dancer. Here again is SEX. To top it off, the most recognized symbol of recent horror, the swastika, is added. This music issue was scheduled for distribution to the order of a multitude of U.S. Catholic churches in the fall of 2005.
Even communications such as religious advertisements and internet greeting card websites, as well as printed directories, are not exempt from horror embeds.
In the occult world, the A symbol, whether it's upside down or an A with a line going all the way through it or partially through it, is a symbol of the Antichrist or anarchy, even with a circle around it. And artists know this, and they're going to put an A in Christian, Catholic art whenever they can get a chance. Catholic Greetings is an internet greeting card company and sends around emails for people to just send to your friends and relatives. And this is what I call the Catholic Greetings A, because this is Mary holding Jesus, and if you look clearly on his head, you have an A around the crown of his head. The line is going about halfway, 3/4 through, but what we do subconsciously is we actually finish that particular line, as if someone wrote you a phone number, 555 something, but the first portion of the 5 was not quite there. It was faint, or it was not quite perfect, but it reads like a 5. So you don't have to finish this all the way across. Some artists do. This one did not. Catholic Greetings also has a picture of Mary, and they have sent this around the internet, which shows the baby Jesus wrapped in a cloak. And there is a profile ghost face, and there is a fish, deformed fish, that is part of that particular cloak around Jesus as well, to add to blasphemy regarding the ichthys fish, the Christian fish that we see so often. This is just one way to do it. Catholic Greetings Father's Day card shows a very burly father, supposed to be a man, and a little boy on top of the man, hugging him apparently. But there's a problem with this particular painting, as you take something that's not quite right displaced with you. And the problem is the left hand, the left arm, again, sinister is left traditionally in the occult world, the left hand, left arm of the father is actually a penis. And you can see the shaft and you can see the knob of this penis. Part of it is hidden right by the boy. The other part is open. But once again, you can displace, you can make it faint, or you can hide part of it. Your mind finishes it and the message is quite clear. The Catholic Greetings card celebrating children sort of playing, reaching to the sky and falling out of the sky is the inverted pentagram. A couple of them. Once again with the star pointed exactly 33 degrees to one side, pointing down, creating a pentagon in the center. Now, they're not perfect, they're not supposed to be, but there's something wrong with those stars. Those are not the real stars, those are the inverted pentagram stars. And they shouldn't be on a card, especially a Catholic greeting card. And in the middle of those particular stars are sixes, lots of them, throughout, making yet another 666 with the inverted pentagrams and kids celebrating this. St. Francis of Assisi, who never can be seen to be left alone, he's often pictured with birds on him. But there's one problem. When you have the most unclean bird, symbol of Satan, symbol of the occult, and a problem not in Christianity, not seen in Christianity, which is the owl, an extremely unclean bird. Of course, this is the showcase bird for St. Francis of Assisi in this picture. He has it in his left hand, sinister hand, as if he's saying, poof, here's the owl. And the owl's looking right at you, like, what are you going to do about it? The Catholic Greetings St. Patrick card shows 2 sixes on St. Patrick's beard, and the other one is usually not far by. So if you look a little low, you'll see the final 6 on sort of his abdomen. And in addition to that, you have 2 reverses on his beard, which are phallic symbols, on the right side of his beard. Catholic Greetings again, showing the inverted pentagram at the top of this particular painting, and a couple of eyes to make a little face, a couple of black eyes and a little smile. So you have a face, a combination inverted pentagram. And if you look, you'll see the way her hands are positioned. She has her hands positioned in a elliptical shape, a vaginal shape, and right above that, a charm, which shows a anal shape right next to each other in proximity. Just looking through the newspaper, you could find all kinds of religious art, and in 2004 I was just reading a newspaper, and here is a cherub selling some kind of jewelry, and the cherub is androgynous, half man, half woman, we don't know. But in addition to that, if you look on the left side, its left side, their red cloak, is this big MSD, smiling devil face.
Even artistic priests utilize shocking embedded deception in their paintings.
A German priest by the name of Sieger Koder, not Father Koder, but Sieger Koder, comma, a German priest, has a painting called Foot Washing. And this painting has made its way throughout the world, even in the United States. And it's a special painting because it contains what is supposed to be foot washing, but is not. Here you see Jesus, faceless Jesus, kneeling in front of someone who has their feet in a bowl of water. But his head, Jesus' head, is being pulled into the crotch of that particular person sitting in the chair with the right hand, and then the left hand holding up as if to say, don't look over here. Something's going on in here. This is not foot washing. If you try to make this position yourself at home, it's quite impossible. In addition to that, inside the water is the reflection of what is supposed to be the face of Christ. But you can see that it is misplaced, displaced, and Christ is shown with a cylindrical mouth. This is not foot washing. This is fellatio. In addition to that, if you look at the shadows behind these two people, you'll see that it resembles a bent over buttocks. Right in the center of this buttocks, you have a divider, and you have bread on the table, symbolizing the host or the body of Christ, and this bread is in the symbol of a sphincter. Improper shadowing allows for a white seminal fluid feature in the center and cascading downward. So you have this bent over ass, and you have fellatio being performed by Jesus. And just in case you didn't see it, well, you can look in the reflection, and what's on his mind is this cylindrical mouth scenario from Sigurd Koder, a German priest.
There's a well-known process called mismatch of schema that's very involved in the way pornographers use the viewer. In Playboy, we used to see the way in which the head of an adult woman would be merged with perhaps part of the body of a teenage girl. A drapery would be put across the lower part of the body so that it's the little girl at the top or the bottom or something. What happens is that the person viewing it becomes completely confused. Being confused, they are somewhat mesmerized. You might call it hypnotized, but they are somewhat mesmerized by that picture because they know there's something very wrong, but they can't figure out what that is. And when you can't figure out or make sense for yourself of what it is that you're looking at, you then have a higher arousal to what it is that you're viewing. The arousal being a function of confusion, fear, anxiety, and curiosity, and all kinds of other things. You'll return to that image again. You'll return to those kinds of stimuli again, purely because you are very confused about what you're seeing. You don't know why you're confused, and so you interpret it as true, and that mismatch of schema causes a continuous return, almost an addictive return.
Koder, in addition to his very horrific art, has, of course, made a Bible for children with his art. After all of this, you would think, what's next? Alien Jesus? Yeah. In fact, you will see in this wild cross a significant alien Christ. In addition, next to the alien Jesus, we have these crosses. And if you notice, the crosses are filled with web, as if no one's touched them. They're alien, they're demonic, they don't have any meaning whatsoever, they're cut in pieces. Not necessarily what you want to have to glorify Christ. And the body of Christ, which is really not the full body of Christ and is not certainly the communion body of Christ, the host. It's a morphed alien body with missing arms and a missing head and missing legs and hips, and conveniently makes out a tremendous face using the chest of what is supposed to be Jesus and a nose, mouth, face of the abdomen. This alien draconian ensemble was showcased during Easter through Cardinal Daniels of Belgium.
Shortly after the initial OCP discoveries, Kalache logged into EWTN, the global Catholic network founded by Mother Angelica, who often used the phrase Luciferian influence in the Catholic Church. She has been recently silenced by a mysteriously lingering illness and subsequent medication.
After investigating the Archdiocese of Toronto and the Oregon Catholic Press, I just broke for lunch one day in May of 2004 and went to the site of EWTN just to watch daily Mass. And up comes a picture of St. Michael the Archangel. And right away you can see that in the cloak of St. Michael is this crushed ET-looking ghostly figure with eyes, a nose, and a neck sitting right there. And underneath the left wing of St. Michael is profanity, the F-bomb, clearly spelled out, F-U-C-K, and then a space and the letter U. On top of the devil's head is clearly spelled out, starting with the blood from the spear, making an S, S-E-X. This was the first item that I had seen with EWTN, which made me realize that they needed to be scrutinized.
After the AFT, which is the largest archdiocese in Canada, followed by the greatest liturgical publisher in the United States, the OCP, the natural choice for evil, would be the biggest global Catholic medium, EWTN.
The Eternal Word television network had a rotational scenario where they would put pictures on the internet for about a few days, maybe a week, maybe even 2 weeks, and they'd rotate them during the years. And one of these pictures is what they call the Sacred Heart of Jesus. But if you look at this particular picture, it's really an androgynous person. It's not Jesus. Could be a woman with a little bit of a beard underneath the shadow of her chin. But what's most important is that if you look at the heart of Jesus, which is incredibly important in Christianity, you'll see that it's not a heart. It's a red delicious apple. And on top of the red delicious apple, perfect shape of this apple, is a round demonic face, which what we call an MSD, morphed smirking devil, looking right at you. On top of that, a three-dimensional scenario happens with the right hand of what is supposed to be Christ, which is actually the head of a pig, with the thumb being the ear and the pierce in the right hand being the eye, smirking at this particular apple because, when you're dealing with apples, sometimes you see it with, in the mouth of a pig. EWTN also has put various saints that come on the website to celebrate their particular feast day, and such as Saint Joseph. The problem here is that the baby Jesus is once again an androgynous, half man, half woman. There's no halo on this baby Jesus. It's sort of like a straw hat, like Huckleberry Finn or something like that, making fun of Jesus. Also, the left hand, considered the sinister hand in the occult world, has the pose of a satanic hand gesture. When you take 3 middle fingers and you bring them together and you put out the pinky and the thumb to either side, that is a satanic hand gesture. It's used by various occult organizations. EWTN would celebrate St. Anne's feast day by putting a picture of St. Anne and a young Mary. And the problem with this is that St. Anne's really not very happy. In fact, she's pointing to the heavens. But if you examine the way she's holding her hand very sensually, almost like she's smoking a cigarette or holding a cigarette, and she's putting a little tickle in that index finger because she is massaging what is the beard of a demonic face, a satanic face with horns. It's green inside the background. It's almost like she's pointing up there reluctantly as Mary is kneeling next to her, as if this is what's in store and we're going to have to give in. Mary, in addition, has a skull in the profile face, a ghostly skull that doesn't belong where it is. It's displaced, and it is between her, under her neck, between her breast and her shoulder. In addition to that, one of the most blatant SEX letters that I've ever seen in 20 years of picking out embeds is in this painting. The artist just left SEX right out in the open with a few leaves, as you can see clearly defined. And above that, of course, the inverted pentagram star pointing down, which traditionally symbolizes Satan. EWTN also has its version of the Adoration of the Magi, and here you have the 3 wise men administering to Jesus and Mary. But there's a problem. One of the wise men who's sitting there has a interesting profile face, demonic face, coming out of the hood of his cloak, And on his arm, you see where you have other body parts intertwined, morphed to form a face. This one has actually two faces of a demon that are together. One's using part of the nose, part of the mouth of the other to form faces together. EWTN's Ash Wednesday 2005 came out right on time, and you see this big head of Christ. It's supposed to be Christ, except there's problems. He has a crown of thorns, and yet in the center of the thorns on his forehead are two lizards, not part of the thorns. One's looking right at you. The other one is quite horrible, demonic. Sort of like a whale head looking to the left, big bottom portion of the mouth, feet, and a tail that looks like a demonic left hand. In addition to all of this, and many other embeds inside this particular painting, are the hair portions of what is again supposed to be Christ, where you see this face of some kind of animal. You have these two big eyes, nose, and a mouth right on the neck hair. EWTN's Body and Blood of Jesus on the cross shows a phallic symbol, a flaccid phallic symbol, hanging and wrapped in a red cloth. You can see that there's a horizontal line dividing what would be the foreskin of this particular phallic symbol, penis. Testicles are wrapped within this particular cloth. But in addition to all of this, there's a face. There's the cloak or the hat of this particular face, two eyes, and a crooked mouth. So all in one on Christ on the cross. EWTN's St. Anthony shows a Down syndrome girl. And she has a pig's left arm and a cloven hoof, and she's tickling the underside of the chin of St. Anthony, an androgynous figure, and the, of course, cloven hoof. The EWTN Christ the King painting has a very disturbing scenario involving the heart, the sacred heart of Jesus once again. If Satan's going to go after Christ, he's going to go after the heart. He's going to go after the right hand. He's going to put sex on their mind, something. And this is a very scary face, and your subconscious mind, your unconscious mind takes all of this in. You'll see that it's a very demonic face, a face with horns, using part of the horns of what is the crown of thorns growing around the heart. EWTN's version of the presentation shows a very reluctant Mary giving over a mummified Jesus wrapped in some kind of bandages. And as you can look at the stomach of this baby, you'll see a displaced face, a mummy face, coming out of the stomach with one of the eyes lower than the other. And in addition to that, these aren't necessarily the guys you want to be handing over your kid to. These are mean faces. There's certainly one looking at the other where you almost have him, and we're going to get him now. Let me have him. Mary's assistant, who could be just about anybody, can't bear to watch on the left side of this particular painting, and she looks away. EWTN, again, with the androgynous Jesus. You see Jesus heading to the heavens with extremely wide hips. A little belly, maybe she's pregnant. So you have blasphemy again with Christ, making Christ a woman. In addition, right behind this person being driven to the heavens is a very scary demonic face in the cloak with just the right eye, its right eye, being hidden or behind the left arm of this person. Renaissance artist Raphael was the painter, commissioned by Giulio de' Medici. The original remains in the Vatican Museum to this day, and a mosaic replica was reproduced as an altarpiece.
Although Intimate Fear was to be filmed mainly in Toronto, its fictional story is based in Chicago. When Kalache arrived in Chicago in the fall of 2004, further embedded occult and sexual imagery continued to be discovered. Within the Archdiocese of Chicago, formerly under the command of the controversial Joseph Cardinal Bernardin and now run by Francis Cardinal George, OCP hymnals and missals were covered up by an adhesive sticker hiding the artwork. Kalache had previously demanded this alternative while being interviewed on numerous talk shows in the summer of 2004. However, the nearby Archdiocese of Joliet, Illinois, run by Bishop Imish, who has a record of transferring priests accused of sexual misconduct, as well as the other Catholic archdioceses, continued to openly display OCP material in their churches, as well as other embed art from World Library Publications and J.S. Pollock.
World Library Publications is an alternate for missals and hymnals in the United States in the pews of churches. Oregon Catholic Press covers 2 out of every 3 pews, churches that you would see in the United States, and the J.S. Pollock is one of the others. The letters SEX appear on the front of the cross beneath the spiral swirl, which is also a symbol used in Wicca. And on the reverse, there is a rooster's head, which is mostly a symbol of Santeria or voodoo. Albrecht Dürer, like Da Vinci, hated the church and actually painted himself as Jesus. Yet he was still showcased by J.S. Pollock as gracing the cover of their missal. In Dürer's Adoration of the Magi, of which St. Joseph isn't even present, he shows Mary as a single parent. There are no witnesses except for a boy thief. The first wise man has embedded faces on his cloak and is reluctantly giving baby Jesus a gold box because Jesus is sternly grabbing it, as wise man number 2, who has a face on his body while performing a satanic hand gesture, stares away. Among other embeds is this left hand pointing down with a faint smirking face on it. Even Michelangelo, in this unfinished sculpture, actually placed himself holding up Jesus and Mary. We have to remember that Renaissance artists actually thought that they were almost equals to God. They were incredible creators, and it went to their head. This humanist approach brought them above it all. They were now above regular human beings. They almost thought that their creative abilities were equal to God himself.
The situation in Portland, headquarters of the Oregon Catholic Press, was riddled with previously unpublicized scandals for many years. Archbishop William Levada was elevated by Pope Benedict XVI to be prefect of the Vatican's Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, which is the same position that the former Joseph Cardinal Ratzinger held under Pope John Paul II. Prior to his Vatican appointment, for several years, Levada was the Archbishop of none other than Portland, Oregon. However, the cycle of decades of pedophile claims and undisclosed scandalous events festered under Levada's watch and eventually surfaced publicly. It was George, a Chicago native, that was appointed to replace Levada as the Archbishop of Portland, before finally replacing Cardinal Bernardine in Chicago after his death. Then, in 2004, the Archdiocese of Portland became the first Catholic archdiocese to declare bankruptcy due to sexual abuse scandals. Regardless, the OCP still launched its new music issue 2005 on schedule, featuring the demonic and sexual artwork of Brother Steve Erspamer. In addition, Erspamer teamed with another Chicagoan, none other than Bishop Wilton Gregory, the former high-profile leader of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, or USCCB, to produce the youth book Lectionary for Masses with Children. Liturgy Training Publications, a multi-million-dollar company run by the Archdiocese of Chicago, funded this book. The centerpiece of the Archdiocese of Chicago is Holy Name Cathedral.
Another technique that artists will employ will be alien, draconian, and reptilian type of elements into artwork, especially into religious artwork. When Cardinal Bernardin came to Holy Name Cathedral, after a while he decided that the stained glass, which had traditional pictures of saints and beautiful things such as that, to be destroyed and blown out and replaced by non-denominational, just colored glass. It didn't match the cathedral. On the left and right side of the altar, the very alien, draconian, cryptic type of strewn web, an alien web. And on the left side of the altar, as you face the altar, the tabernacle is in this cylindrical circle, and it is stuck on a web, like a spider has eggs on a particular web. And you'll see a saint stuck at the top, but you'll see the hands, the wrists of the saint embraced, like trapped in the web. This strewn element of alien and draconian art is quite demonic, showing that things are not of this world, and as an additional element of horror and satanic elements right in church. And on the other side of the altar, you have Mary, who's trapped with some kind of saints that are trying to get to her, and they're trapped in this web. And this was specially ordered to cover the entire area on each side of the altar. In addition to that, at the very beginning of the church, there's a cocoon-like alien area at the doors. But it's not hexagons. It's not of this world. It gives you the impression that it's not human. The organ at Holy Name Cathedral contains a musical pentagram that, when spun by the organist, often becomes placed as a satanic inverted pentagram. The cross above the altar at Holy Name Cathedral is Jesus encapsulated. Like he didn't make it out. He didn't rise. He died on the cross, and that's it. He's stuck. He's stuck inside this box. And that's it. There is no risen Christ. He's just dead, and he's not nailed to a cross. He's in a box. That also relates to the Egyptian history of sarcophagus, and it's showing that Christ isn't who Christ really is.
But this was not all. Holy Name Cathedral also exhibited an alternate method of embed art by use of artificially manipulated natural elements.
One of the finest forms of camouflage outside of simple manipulation of art in a physical sense would be the manipulation of natural elements. You can take a natural element, such as marble or wood, and manipulate it to become artificial. Literally taking it, cutting it in a certain way, and using the pieces left over in order to create something artificially. And this is one of the greatest forms of camouflage, because people think, wait a minute, that's marble. That's wood. That's natural. And you would ordinarily dismiss that, and absolutely. A cloud passes through the sky, you'd ordinarily dismiss that as without a problem, because it's a natural element. But when you're looking at marble in its regular grown veined sense, it is natural. But if you take a slab of marble and you look and you see how you can book match, meaning you can cut a slab and cut another slab and then match one slab onto the other to create something artificial, now you really have hit the jackpot, because you can create faces, letters, all kinds of things. This was one of the things that the Archdiocese of Chicago has present in Holy Name Cathedral, which is the main church of the Archdiocese.
Richard Bauer is a third-generation expert in natural forming elements of marble and its manipulation by requested design.
Book matching is a form of taking marble out of a block that's cut out of the mountain, and it's basically sliced like a loaf of bread, and the veining, depending on your application, can be cut and matched from side to side and front to back.
Holy Name Cathedral has a significant amount of book-matched and altered natural elements in marble around the entire rim of the ceiling of the church. And one of the biggest of all is this gigantic skull with googly eyes sort of smirking right at you, which is positioned directly above the tabernacle. And it is wildly cryptic, wildly alien, certainly taking the natural element of marble and manipulating it. Here we see an open snake mouth. Here we see a bat and various other symbols, such as the symbol X with an elliptical vaginal opening in it, and faces that have antennae that would put inside. It's very easy to book match. You're just simply cutting marble and the same sheet underneath, because the veins go through the marble, and once you flip one side over, glaze the underside of the other, and put them together, you get a mirror image. And that's quite nice when you're talking about wood and marble as natural elements. But when you're trying to manipulate it into making something and making something demonic, well, that's a totally different thing.
Churches even utilized stained glass to embed imagery.
Such as this church in Geneva, Illinois, where you see these gigantic red arrows, just gigantic red arrows pointing up as if the devil himself is ready to strike against heaven on either side of the altar. Completely blood red, red being a symbol of fire and blood and war. And they're full of bullet hole graphics. The stained glass even features the dead ichthys fish, which is just skull and bones. St. Peter and Paul Church in Naperville, Illinois, has a red ceiling, a red sky above the altar. Red, again, a symbol of fire and blood and heavens, explosion, apocalypse, these things. Not appropriate in church, especially since at the bottom of these red areas are horned S's, both front and backward, with a circle and a dot in the center. Occult symbols, horned S's. S for Satan, horns on the S's, circle with a dot in the center. Not appropriate to say the least. Taking these together, as shown above at the top of the ceiling, you can see that it creates a face. And on the inside of the S's is the number 6, multiple times.
Embed art can have an effect on global interrelated religious issues as well.
During the World Thanksgiving Feast Day in Dallas, then Cardinal Ratzinger signed off on what is essentially a one world government, one world religion wannabe organization.
Then, in the summer of 2005, Pope Benedict XVI issued the New Compendium of Catholic Doctrine, published by the USCCB, which included artwork that was near to the heart of then Cardinal Ratzinger. However, the compendium featured paintings that were from El Greco, Jan van Eyck, and Gentile da Fabriano, among others, all notorious embed artists who, along with Da Vinci, Botticelli, and Dürer, disliked the church.
El Greco, which appears as part of the New Compendium. And it's bothersome because you have artists who dislike the church. Of course, he's going to take the money to make this painting. It's a commission, he needs the money, he's supposedly a genius, he takes years to make the painting. Everything is planned, sketched out first. So he has Jesus and he's sitting in the Garden of Gethsemane and he's being administered, asking for the cup to pass him by. But the problem we have is that on Jesus, on his cloak, which is red, is this gigantic, demonic dog face with horns sitting directly on Christ. Another painting by El Greco, which is part of the New Compendium, is a painting that took several years to complete. First traced, well-planned, and you can see in this particular painting that there's sort of like the Grim Reaper scenario, if you see here. You have a red cloak that has a hat, 2 eyes, nose, crooked mouth, and holding in its right hand some kind of sickle, which it looks like the actual back of the wing of the saint that's next to it. In addition, Mary is wearing this incredibly elongated face, an MSD, with eyes, open mouth, right smack in the middle of this painting. As we move to the lower portion, you see some kind of little puff kitten face, another MSD, eyes, nose, and a mouth. And even lower, which is really considered to be a level 1 or 0 embed, meaning that it's very easy to see, is this open-mouthed lizard, very scary. looking to devour something. The Art Institute of Chicago houses El Greco's massive Assumption of Mary, which also contains embeds, including a demonic triangular red face on this cloak. Jan van Eyck is another artist that is mentioned as an artist in the new compendium from Pope Benedict XVI. This is not the kind of guy that you want to have as mentioned as a great artist of the world, because there is a painting that he made called the Arnolfini Marriage, which shows an incredibly striking resemblance to Russian President Vladimir Putin and his wife. This is incredible because someone who has the capacity to be painting somebody of the future is surely enveloped with some special powers and maybe needs to be examined further before being glorified in the new compendium of the Catholic Church, and especially through a new pope.
I found it very easy to prove these things are there. Simply show them to people. Visual proof is acceptable evidence in any court in the land. The problem of this is a little more deeper than that. They have already seen it. You're simply bringing it from the unconscious level to the conscious. And this often produces a little chill, kind of a scary feeling. Why didn't I see that? It's always been there. But one thing in this kind of work you have to condition yourself to, nothing is hidden. Nothing is hidden. The artist is not hiding anything. It's what you, the viewer, are hiding from yourself that makes it work. So you are a participant in this game.
Truly, when you see an image and you're not physically raped or violated, you can be emotionally violated. This is a true violation, a rape of the soul, because it's happening unconsciously, subconsciously, but it's happening no matter what. Now, people don't have this necessary excuse where, oh, well, that's just little Jimmy down the block or little Ed or whoever, and they were raped, and it was a priest or it was somebody else, and there was a pedophile problem, and they have a big problem over there. Now, you actually had this happen to you. And all you had to do is go to church and look in the pews or look on the internet or look in your email or any other place in stained glass or paintings, and you see embeds that clearly are intended to program a person with an evil intent.
When I talked to Father Martin, he talked about pedophilia. Now, this was in 1996 when I was interviewing him, and he was talking about the extensive involvement of priests and bishops in pedophilia. It was only some years later that it came out publicly how extensive the pedophile network within the Catholic Church was, and it was being covered up by cardinals and people at the highest echelons of the church. And instead of turning the pedophiles over to the law where they should have been punished, these pedophile priests were simply transferred to another diocese where they could continue their abuse of children.
If they didn't know what they were doing at the highest level, they would have perished long, long ago. Of course they know. It's curious to me because I've known about homosexuality in the priesthood for at least 40 years. This is no secret. There are seminaries where you almost have to qualify as a homosexual to get accepted as a student. And now, if you have this many homosexual priests among the soldiers on the battlefield, you also have people in the hierarchy who are homosexuals. Now, homosexuals does not necessarily mean you molest children. There are a few who do. And those are the ones, of course, who get the publicity. And yet we've had a homosexual cardinal here in the United States. We've had a homosexual priest. It's not at all uncommon. And so the church is denying publicly something that they have been very much involved in for centuries. And that speaks a bit of hypocrisy somehow to me.
The carnage visited upon a child's psyche, their sense of worthiness, their image of themselves as a child of God, is overwhelming when it comes from a trusted source. Let me be really clear. Teachers are en masse abusing children today, sexually abusing children today. Teachers in public, parochial, and private schools. There is no question about that. Parents, boyfriends of the mother, people in the home are sexually abusing children today. When that child is abused by someone who they depend on for protection and for honoring themselves, yes, you're looking at disaster.
Kalache decided that the publicity of a surgical strike throughout all levels of the church would derail this blasphemous occult and pornographic artwork, as well as bring down religious predators themselves through their exposure.
Well, we know that Pope Paul VI, it was in 1972, spoke about the smoke of Satan working within the sanctuaries of the Vatican. And there has been an effort, of course, to try to bring the truth out, but it's been very, very carefully suppressed. Many of the highest members of the church know exactly what's going on and are afraid to speak out. And, of course, the average parishioner has no realization that there is today, working within the highest echelons of the Catholic Church, a satanic influence.
Why people don't want to see this has always been very curious to me, because what you're doing by exposing falsehood and betrayal, actually, of the audience, is embarrassing them. Most of us want to believe, some of us want to believe very desperately, that what we perceive is true. People are doing it in good faith, they're honest, they're being fair with us. And when you suddenly discover we've been cheated, we tend to get rather angry about it sometimes, or we'll go into denial and say, well, it's not there. I don't see it. Nobody would do that. And most of us in this country live in a state of denial or repression. I remember Marshall McLuhan made a comment one time, the big problem when you look at the media in North America is not whether or not there has been life after death, but whether there has been life before death. Because most of what's going on around us we are not consciously aware of. Wake up.
Is it predatory? You bet it is. Is it planned? Of course it is. And is it successful with the society we have today? It certainly is.
Truly, this is a spiritual war we're fighting right now, and you can choose to ignore that, or you can really take some serious action. But you have to speak publicly. You can't be afraid. You have to fight the good fight. The soul is more valuable than that. And now millions and millions and millions of people around the world have either simultaneously or within milliseconds of each other, seen material that has affected them, whether they like it or not, or whether they know it or not, and it needs to be eliminated. So therefore, you need to stand up and fight and make sure that it does not continue. Do not stand for this, please.
To say that this is a critical time in history is an understatement. Only through the truth, exposure, and public pressure will the predatory officials and people in all levels of responsibility in religious organizations be eliminated, in order to regain the trust of their followers, which is critical to the preservation of the Christian religion itself.